Widowed millionaire takes his blind daughter to the zoo. Until a black nanny changes their life. The Morning Sun cast. Long shadows through the wrought iron gates of Lincoln Park Zoo in Chicago, painting golden stripes across the pathway where Thomas Harrison walked slowly, his 8-year-old daughter. Emma's small hand nestled securely in his. Her unseeing eyes were hidden behind pink sunglasses, but her face was turned upward, drinking in the sounds and smells of the bustling Saturday morning crowd. Thomas watched her with that mixture of love and heartache that had become his constant companion since the accident 2 years ago, the one that had stolen both his wife. Margaret and Emma's sight in a single devastating instant. As CEO of one of Chicago's most successful technology firms, Thomas could buy Emma anything in the world, but he couldn't buy back what she had lost. Today's zoo visit was their weekly ritual, a promise he'd made to himself to ensure Emma experienced as much of the world as possible, even if she could no longer see it. Little did Thomas know that this particular Saturday morning would mark the beginning of a transformation that would change not just their lives, but the lives of countless others across the city. The Penguin. Exhibit was Emma's favorite spot, because the birds made such distinctive sounds, splashing, squawking, and what she called their happy waddle noises, when the keeper threw fish during feeding time. Thomas was describing the way the penguins dove into the crystal blue water. When a sharp, angry voice cut through the peaceful morning like a knife through silk. I don't pay these outrageous membership fees for my granddaughter to share space with people like you. The voice belonged to an elegantly dressed woman in her 60s, dripping with jewelry that caught the morning light, her face twisted with disgust, as she glared at a young African-American woman who was holding the hand of a small blonde girl. The nanny, who couldn't have been older than 30, stood perfectly still, her dark eyes calm. Despite the public humiliation being heaped upon her, she wore a simple uniform, navy blue with white trim, and her hair was pulled back in a neat bun. The little girl beside her, perhaps 5 or 6 years old, pressed closer to her nanny's leg, clearly frightened by her grandmother's outburst. Mrs. Ashworth, we're simply enjoying the penguins, the nanny said, her voice steady and dignified. Lily loves watching them swim. But Victoria Ashworth wasn't interested in reason or dignity. Her voice grew louder, attracting stares from other zoo visitors. Don't you dare speak to me as if we're equals. You people have your own places to go. This zoo has standards, or at least it used to, before they started letting anyone in. Emma tugged urgently at Thomas's sleeve, her sensitive hearing, picking up every word of the ugly confrontation. Daddy, why is that lady being so mean? The other lady sounds nice. She sounds sad, but nice. Thomas's jaw clenched as he watched the scene unfold. In his boardrooms, he'd dealt with difficult people, but this raw, naked prejudice in front of children made his stomach turn. The crowd that had gathered seemed frozen, some recording with their phones, others looking away, uncomfortably, but no one stepping forward to help. The young nanny, he heard Mrs. Ashworth call her Jasmine, maintained her composure with remarkable grace, but Thomas could see the slight tremor in her hands as she held onto little Lily. Perhaps we should move to another exhibit, Lily, Jasmine said softly to the child. But as they turned to leave, something unexpected happened. Little Lily broke free from Jasmine's grasp and ran toward the penguin enclosure's viewing glass, her small hands pressed against it in excitement. Look, Miss Jasmine, that one's doing a flip. The child's innocent joy should have been heartwarming, but her sudden movement had taken her dangerously close to the wet edge, where the concrete sloped down sharply. Jasmine reacted instantly, lunging forward to catch Lily, just as the child's foot slipped on the wet surface. In one fluid motion, she pulled Lily back to safety, but the momentum sent Jasmine tumbling to the ground, her uniform instantly soaked with muddy water from a nearby puddle. Victoria Ashworth's reaction was not relief that her granddaughter was safe, but fury that seemed to burn even hotter. "Now, look what you've done. You can't even watch a child properly. This is exactly why your kind shouldn't be trusted with our children. You're incompetent, careless, and you've embarrassed me in front of everyone." The accusation was so obviously false that several people in the crowd gasped. Jasmine had just saved the child from a potentially serious fall, yet she was being blamed for it. Thomas noticed something peculiar. In that moment, as Jasmine slowly stood up, muddy water dripping from her uniform, she looked directly at Victoria Ashworth and smiled. It wasn't a smile of submission or embarrassment. It was something else entirely, something that made Thomas's business instincts suddenly alert. There was intelligence in those eyes, a depth that didn't match the simple nanny role she was playing. "You're absolutely right, Mrs. Ashworth," Jasmine said, her voice carrying a strange note of confidence, despite her disheveled appearance. "People like me definitely have a very specific place in society, and I know exactly where that place is." The words hung in the air like a challenge disguised as agreement. Victoria Ashworth seemed to sense something was off, but couldn't quite place it. She grabbed Lily's hand roughly, pulling the child away from Jasmine. "You're fired. I'll call the agency Monday morning. Don't bother coming back to the house." Thomas watched Jasmine's face carefully. Instead of devastation at losing her job, he saw what looked almost like satisfaction, as if things were going exactly according to some plan only she knew about. She nodded calmly, wringing out the bottom of her muddy uniform. "Of course, Mrs. Ashworth. I understand completely." As the older woman stormed off with her granddaughter in tow, Thomas made a decision. He approached Jasmine, Emma still holding his hand. "Excuse me, miss. I saw what happened. That was incredibly unfair. You saved that little girl." Jasmine looked at him with those intelligent eyes, studying him for a moment before responding. "Thank you, but I'm used to it. Some people see what they want to see, regardless of the truth." Emma stepped forward slightly, her face turned toward Jasmine's voice. "You have a kind voice. I'm Emma. I can't see, but I can tell you're smiling. Not a happy smile, though. It's a different kind." Jasmine knelt down to Emma's level, and Thomas heard genuine warmth enter her voice for the first time. "You're very perceptive, Emma. You're right. It's not exactly a happy smile, it's more of a waiting smile." Thomas pulled out his business card. "I'm Thomas Harrison. I run a technology company here in Chicago. If you need a reference for a new position, or if there's anything I can do to help, please call me." Jasmine took the card, and again, that mysterious smile played at the corners of her mouth. Thomas Harrison. Of Harrison Technologies, the company, developing adaptive learning software for children with disabilities. Thomas's surprise must have shown on his face, because Jasmine's smile widened slightly. "I make it my business to know about people who are trying to make a real difference in education, Mr. Harrison. Your work is quite impressive." Before Thomas could respond, Jasmine had disappeared into the crowd, leaving him with the unsettling feeling that their encounter was far from accidental. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas couldn't stop thinking about the incident at the zoo. There had been something about Jasmine's reaction, her mysterious confidence. Despite the humiliation that nagged at him, he'd built his company by trusting his instincts about people, and every instinct told him there was more to Jasmine than met the eye. He'd tried calling the number on file at the domestic agency where Victoria Ashworth had hired her, but they claimed to have no forwarding information. It was as if Jasmine had simply vanished. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. Thomas was in the middle of a crucial investor meeting about his new inclusive education initiative, a project inspired by Emma's struggles to find appropriate educational resources after losing her sight, when his assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Harrison, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who says she has information about your education project. She says it's urgent and that you'll want to hear what she has to say." Thomas frowned. The project was still confidential, known only to his inner circle and the investors in the room. "Send them in," he said, curiosity overcoming caution. The door opened, and Thomas nearly fell out of his chair. It was Jasmine, but transformed. Gone was the simple nanny uniform. Instead, she wore an impeccably tailored business suit, carried a leather portfolio, and walked with the confidence of someone who belonged in corporate boardrooms. The investors looked confused, but Thomas held up a hand to forestall their questions. "Gentlemen, allow me." A moment. Jasmine stepped forward, her entire demeanor different from the woman he'd met at the zoo. "Mr. Harrison, board members, I apologize for the interruption, but I believe what I have to share will be worth your time." She opened her portfolio and pulled out a bound presentation. "My name is Dr. Jasmine Carter. I hold a Ph.D. in special education from Harvard University, and I've spent the last 6 months conducting undercover research into discriminatory practices in Chicago's elite private schools." The room went completely silent. Thomas felt as if the floor had shifted beneath his feet. "Dr. Carter?" he repeated, his mind racing to recalibrate everything he thought he knew. Jasmine, Dr. Carter, nodded, a small smile playing at her lips. "The same woman you met at the zoo 2 weeks ago, yes, though I was playing a very different role that day." One of the investors, an older man named Richard Steinberg, leaned forward. "Are you saying you deliberately took a job as a nanny to—" "What exactly?" Dr. Carter turned to address him directly, to document firsthand how Chicago's most prestigious educational institutions systematically discriminate against children with disabilities, children of color, and anyone else they deem inappropriate for their institutions. The Ashworth family, whom you saw at the zoo, owns one of the largest chains of these schools. She pulled out a tablet and connected it to the conference room's display system. What appeared on screen made everyone in the room lean forward in shock. There were emails, recorded conversations, and documents, a treasure trove of evidence showing systematic discrimination. "For 6 months, I worked in the Ashworth home," Dr. Carter explained, her voice professional, but carrying an undertone of controlled anger. "I listened to Victoria Ashworth and her associates plan how to keep undesirable children out of their schools. I documented how they would find excuses to expel children with learning disabilities, how they would discourage applications from minority families, how they would maintain what they called standards. But what was really just bigotry, dressed up in educational jargon. Thomas's mind was reeling, but one question pushed to the forefront. Why come to me? Why reveal this now? Dr. Carter looked him directly in the eye. "Because, Mr. Harrison, you're developing exactly the kind of educational technology that could render institutions like the Ashworth schools obsolete. Your adaptive learning platform could give children like Emma and thousands of others who've been denied proper education the tools they need to succeed. But more than that, I've researched. You have the influence and the integrity to help me expose what's really happening in these schools. The lead investor, Margaret Chen, spoke up for the first time. This is all very shocking, Dr. Carter, but what exactly are you proposing? Dr. Carter pulled out another document. A partnership. I have 6 months of evidence that could expose the discrimination and potentially shut down the Ashworth School's ability to operate. You have the technology and the business platform to provide an alternative. Together, we could not only bring justice to those who've been wronged, but create a new model for inclusive education that could transform how this entire city, maybe even the country, thinks about learning differences. Thomas thought about Emma, about all the schools that had subtly suggested she might be better served elsewhere after her accident. He thought about the countless other children who'd been turned away or pushed out because they didn't fit someone's narrow definition of acceptable. The Ashworths are powerful, he said carefully. They have connections throughout the city government, the police, the media. Going after them won't be easy. Dr. Carter's smile was sharp as a blade. I'm counting on it being difficult, Mr. Harrison. Easy victories don't create lasting change. But I think you'll find I've been very thorough in my preparation. She pulled out a thick folder and placed it on the table. 6 months of recorded conversations, including several where Victoria Ashworth explicitly states her discriminatory policies. Email threads discussing how to discourage applications from what she calls problematic demographics. Financial records showing that they've been overcharging for services they don't actually provide to special needs students, essentially committing fraud. Richard Steinberg whistled low. This is a legal nuclear bomb. If this is all legitimate, every piece of evidence was obtained legally, Dr. Carter assured him. I was employed in their home, and Illinois is a one-party consent state for recordings. The emails were sent to my work account as part of my duties. Everything will hold up in court. Thomas stood up, pacing to the window. The city stretched out below, full of children like Emma who deserved better than what they were being offered. What's your real goal here, Dr. Carter? Revenge? Justice? Money? Dr. Carter's voice softened, and, for the first time, Thomas heard the emotion beneath the professional exterior. My younger brother Marcus has autism. He's brilliant. He can solve mathematical equations that would stump most college professors. But he was rejected from every private school in Chicago because he doesn't make eye contact and sometimes rocks when he's thinking. He ended up in an underfunded public school where they treated him like he was broken instead of just different. He's 23 now, working as a janitor because no one ever believed in his potential enough to help him develop it. So yes, Mr. Harrison, this is personal, but it's also bigger than just my family or the Ashworths. This is about every child who's been told they're not good enough, not normal enough, not the right color, or the right class, or the right anything enough to deserve an excellent education. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Margaret. Chen spoke. I'm in. My daughter has dyslexia, and we've faced our share of concerns from schools. If we can create something better, something that actually serves all children, then this is exactly the kind of project we should be investing in. One by one, the other investors nodded their agreement. Thomas turned back to Dr. Carter. All right, we're in, but we do this right, legally ethically, and in a way that creates real change, not just revenge. Dr. Carter extended her hand. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say, Mr. Harrison. Now let me tell you about Phase 2 of my plan. As she began outlining her strategy, Thomas realized that the woman he'd mistaken for a simple nanny at the zoo was actually a strategic genius who had turned 6 months of humiliation and discrimination into a carefully orchestrated campaign for justice. The Ashworths had no idea what was coming for them. Over the next month, Thomas and Dr. Carter worked in careful coordination, building their case like master architects constructing a fortress. Thomas used his connections to quietly reach out to families who'd had negative experiences with Ashworth schools, while Dr. Carter compiled and organized the evidence into an airtight legal case. The breakthrough came when Thomas discovered something Dr. Carter hadn't even known about. The Ashworths had been receiving federal funding designated for special education services that they weren't actually providing. This transformed the case from civil discrimination to federal fraud. Meanwhile, Emma had started attending a small progressive school that Dr. Carter had recommended, one that truly embraced inclusive education. For the first time since the accident, Thomas saw his daughter, genuinely excited about learning again. She came home, talking about her new friends, about the special computer that read texts aloud to her, about the teacher who taught the whole class. Basic Braille so they could leave. Notes for Emma. "Daddy," Emma said one evening, "Dr. Jasmine was right. My blindness isn't something wrong with me. It's just a different way of experiencing the world." Thomas hugged his daughter tightly, thinking about all the children who hadn't been as fortunate as Emma, who'd been told their differences made them less than, rather than simply different. The explosion came on a Thursday morning. Thomas had coordinated with investigative journalists at 3 major newspapers, and the story broke simultaneously across all of them. Elite Chicago schools under federal investigation for fraud and discrimination. The headlines were accompanied by some of Dr. Carter's most damning recordings, including one where Victoria Ashworth was heard, saying, "I don't care if the federal money is supposed to help those special needs brats. We'll use it to maintain our standards for the students who actually matter." By noon, the FBI had raided the Ashworth School's administrative offices. By evening, Victoria Ashworth was being led away in handcuffs on federal fraud charges, her perfect composure finally cracked, her face a mask of shock and humiliation. But Dr. Carter and Thomas weren't content with just bringing down the Ashworths. That same week, they announced the launch of their new educational initiative, the Phoenix Learning Centers, a chain of schools built from the ground up to serve all children, regardless of ability, race, or economic background. The schools would use Thomas's adaptive technology to customize learning for each child's needs and strengths. "We're not just creating schools," Dr. Carter explained at the press conference. "We're creating a new model for what education can be when we stop trying to force all children into the same mold and instead help each child reach their unique potential." The response was overwhelming. Within 2 weeks, they had received applications for over 1,000 students and inquiries from educators across the country wanting to implement their model. Major technology companies reached out about partnerships. The Department of Education invited them to present their model as a potential national standard. Victoria Ashworth's trial became a national sensation. As more evidence came out, including testimony from dozens of families whose children had been discriminated against, the true scope of the systematic prejudice became clear. The woman who had built an empire on exclusion and discrimination watched it all crumble. from a federal detention center, unable to make bail after being deemed a flight risk. During the trial, one moment stood out above all others. Dr. Carter was called to testify, and Victoria. Ashworth's lawyer tried to paint her as a vengeful employee who had orchestrated an elaborate entrapment. "Isn't it true, Dr. Carter, that you took the nanny position under false pretenses?" the lawyer demanded. Dr. Carter remained calm. "I applied for a position that was advertised. I was qualified for it. I have extensive experience in child development. The fact that Mrs. Ashworth never bothered to actually check my qualifications or see me as anything more than what her prejudices told her I was. Well, that's not my failing, is it?" "You deliberately deceived her." "No," Dr. Carter responded firmly. "She deceived herself. She saw a young black woman and made assumptions about my intelligence, my education, my worth as a human being. I simply didn't correct her false assumptions. If she had treated me with basic human dignity, if she had bothered to actually know who was caring for her granddaughter, she would have discovered the truth easily. But she was so blinded by her own bigotry that she never even considered I might be more than what her prejudices told her I was." The courtroom was silent. Even Victoria Ashworth's own lawyer seemed to have no response to that. The verdict came down 6 months later, guilty on all counts. Victoria Ashworth was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison and ordered to pay millions in restitution to the families her schools had defrauded and discriminated against. The Ashworth schools were shut down, their assets liquidated to pay for damages. But the real victory wasn't in the punishment. It was in what rose from the ashes. The Phoenix Learning Centers opened their first 3 locations that fall, with Emma proudly serving as a student ambassador at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. She stood at the podium, her small hands finding the braille notes. Dr. Carter had helped her prepare and spoke clearly into the microphone. "My name is Emma Harrison, and I'm blind, but that doesn't make me less than anyone else. It just means I experience the world differently. This school, these teachers, they understand that. They don't try to fix us or hide us or make us go away. They help us be the best versions of ourselves, and that's what every kid deserves." The audience erupted in applause. Thomas saw Dr. Carter wiping tears from her eyes, and he knew she was thinking about her brother Marcus, who had just enrolled in an adult education program at one of their centers to finally pursue the mathematics degree he should have gotten years ago. A year later, Thomas and Dr. Carter stood in what had once been the flagship Ashworth Academy, now transformed into the newest Phoenix Learning Center. The walls that had once displayed portraits of exclusively white, wealthy alumni now showcased artwork created by students of every background and ability. The classrooms that had once excluded children for being different now bustled with adaptive technology and innovative teaching methods. "You know," Thomas said, watching Emma lead a group of new students on a tour, her cane tapping confidently. As she described each room from memory, Victoria Ashworth was right about one thing. People like you do have a specific place in society. Dr. Carter raised an eyebrow. "Oh? Yes," Thomas smiled. "At the forefront of change, leading the revolution, showing the rest of us what's possible when we stop accepting that's how it's always been, as an excuse for injustice." Dr. Carter smiled, that same mysterious smile Thomas had first seen at the zoo. "You know what the ironic thing is? If Victoria had just been kind that day at the zoo, if she had shown basic human decency, none of this would have happened. Her schools would still be operating, she'd still be free, and thousands of children would still be suffering in silence. Her cruelty was the catalyst for her own destruction and the transformation of an entire educational system." As they watched, The children learning together, some in wheelchairs, some with developmental differences, some from wealthy families, some from struggling ones, all treated with equal respect and given equal opportunities. Thomas thought about that day Dihiu Hatikri, the zoo that had started it all. Widowed millionaire takes his blind daughter to the zoo. Until a black nanny changes their life, he murmured, thinking about how the tabloids had tried to sensationalize their story. They got the headline wrong, though. Dr. Carter looked at him questioningly. It should have been, "Brilliant educator disguised as nanny changes thousands of lives," Thomas continued, "though I suppose that wouldn't have sold as many papers." Dr. Carter laughed, a genuine, warm sound. "I prefer to think of it as underestimated woman shows city the true meaning of justice." But the real headline, Mr. Harrison, is being written by those children in there. Every day they succeed, every barrier they break, every dream they achieve, that someone like Victoria Ashworth would have denied them. That's the real story. Emma appeared in the doorway, her face bright with excitement. "Dad, Dr. Jasmine, come quick. Marcus just solved that impossible equation the MIT professors sent over. They want to offer him a full scholarship." As they rushed to celebrate. With Marcus, Thomas reflected on how a chance encounter at the zoo had led to all of this. Sometimes justice needed more than hope. It needed brilliant minds willing to play the long game, to endure humiliation, in service of a greater purpose, to transform personal pain into systemic change. Victoria Ashworth had believed that people like Dr. Carter existed to serve people like her. She had been so blinded by her own prejudice that she never saw the revolution being planned right under her nose. Now, from her federal prison cell, she had 5 years to contemplate how her inability to see the humanity and potential in others had led to her complete downfall. Meanwhile, the Phoenix Learning Centers continued to grow, spreading across the state and then the nation. Each new school that opened was a repudiation of everything the Ashworth Empire had stood for. Children who would have been rejected, marginalized, or hidden away were instead celebrated, supported, and empowered to reach their full potential. The ripple effects extended far beyond education. Other industries began examining their own discriminatory practices. Companies started implementing truly inclusive policies. The city of Chicago passed new anti-discrimination ordinances with real teeth, all because one woman had the courage to endure 6 months of humiliation, to gather the evidence needed to bring down a corrupt system, and one man had the resources and integrity to help her rebuild something better in its place. Dr. Jasmine Carter had been right that day at the zoo when she said people like her had a specific place in society. That place was at the vanguard of justice, showing the world that true excellence isn't about maintaining arbitrary standards or preserving traditional hierarchies. True excellence is about recognizing and nurturing the potential in every single child, regardless of how they look, how they learn, or where they come from. As Thomas watched Emma and her classmates put on their end-of-year performance, a production of The Wizard of Oz, adapted, so every child could participate regardless of ability, he thought about Margaret, his late wife. She would have been so proud of what they'd built from the ashes of tragedy. She would have loved Dr. Carter's brilliant mind and fierce dedication to justice, and she would have been amazed at how Emma had transformed, from a girl defeated by her disability into a confident young advocate for inclusive education. The performance ended with all the children on stage, singing Over the Rainbow, their voices blending in imperfect but beautiful harmony. Some signed the words, some used assistive devices to participate, some sang off-key, but all were included, all were valued, all were given their moment to shine. In the audience, Thomas saw Dr. Carter's brother Marcus recording the performance on his phone, tears streaming down his face. As he watched these children receive the acceptance and opportunity he'd been denied for so long. Next to him sat other families who'd been hurt by the Ashworth schools, all here to celebrate the birth of something better. Widowed millionaire takes his blind daughter to the zoo. Until a black nanny changes their life, Thomas thought again. The headline had been right about one thing. Their lives had indeed been changed. But it wasn't just their lives. It was the lives of every child who would walk through the doors of a Phoenix Learning Center, every family who would finally see their child valued for who they were, rather than rejected for who they weren't. Every educator who now had a model for what inclusive education could truly be, all because of a chance encounter. At the zoo, between a grieving father, his blind daughter, and a brilliant woman, who had turned discrimination into determination, humiliation into hope, and injustice into inspiration for a better tomorrow. The story that had begun with prejudice at the Penguin exhibit had become something none of them could have imagined, a testament to the power of strategic resistance, the importance of allies with resources and integrity, and the fundamental truth that when we underestimate people based on our prejudices, we don't just harm them. We rob ourselves of the innovations, insights, and transformations they could bring to our world. Victoria Ashworth had learned this lesson too late from inside a federal prison cell, but thousands of children would benefit from her downfall, rising from the ashes of her discriminatory empire to reach heights she would have denied them. And at the center of it all were two unlikely partners, a widowed tech millionaire and a brilliant educator who had once pretended to be a nanny, proving that sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin, not with violence or protests, but with patience, planning, and the perfect moment to reveal the truth. As the sun set over Chicago that evening, casting long shadows through the windows of the Phoenix Learning Center, Emma found her way to her father's side. "Dad," she said thoughtfully, "Dr. Jasmine once told me that blindness isn't my weakness. It's what taught me to really see people for who they are. I think she's right. I think maybe I see better than people who have their eyes." Thomas hugged his daughter close, thinking about all the ways she'd taught him to see, beyond the surface of things. "You know what, sweetheart? I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's exactly the kind of vision this world needs more of. The true measure of a society isn't how it treats its most privileged members, but how it embraces and uplifts those who are different, those who are challenged, those who have been marginalized." The Phoenix Learning Centers stood as monuments to this truth, built on the ruins of prejudice, rising toward a future where every child, regardless of ability, race, or circumstance, could spread their wings and soar. The woman who had proclaimed that people like Dr. Carter needed to know their place had inadvertently revealed a profound truth. Dr. Carter did know her place. It was at the forefront of educational revolution, transforming a system that had failed so many for so long. And Victoria Ashworth had discovered her own place as well, a cautionary tale of how prejudice, arrogance, and cruelty inevitably lead to downfall, while courage, intelligence, and compassion light the way toward justice. The story that had begun with widowed millionaire takes his blind daughter to the zoo, until a black nanny changes their life, had become so much more than anyone could have imagined. It had become a story of transformation, not just for Thomas and Emma Harrison, not just for Dr. Jasmine Carter and her brother Marcus, but for Anne, entire generation of children who would grow up in a world where their differences were celebrated, rather than hidden, where their challenges were met with support, rather than exclusion, where their potential was nurtured rather than denied. And it all started with a moment at the zoo, when a brilliant woman disguised as a nanny smiled that mysterious smile, knowing that justice was coming, that change was possible, and that sometimes the greatest revolutions begin not with grand gestures, but with the quiet determination to prove that everyone deserves the chance to reach their full potential.